Radio Retrofuture.
So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get straight to it. Welcome to another episode of Radio Retrofuture, and today I am with Tomothy Howard. Good evening, Timothy.
Good evening, Bonsart.
So, yes, and you are a writer, but before we get into the show for tonight, I'm happy to announce we're nearly at 300 subscribers, which I'm really happy about. I'm also working on the 4th episode of the Steampunk's Beginner's Guide, and I have some other ideas planned for more elaborate episodes for you to enjoy in the near future, hopefully. And with that out of the way, let's get back to Timothy. So, how are you doing, Timothy? And tell us, what do you do in your daily life before we get into your fiction?
Not that much. I work a 6-hour a day, 30-hour a week job, and during the time I have free, I write or play video games or anything of the, procrastinate. Life's pretty simple. Aside from that, obviously I attend steampunk events. I attended one in Cambridge last weekend. Wonderful time, as always. It's always lovely to meet other steampunks in the community because, as one of the slogans I think once pointed out, be splendid, and everyone is splendid as a result.
Oh, yeah.
But aside from that, aside from doing my usual job and obviously going to these events, maybe doing a few things up here and there to, obviously make sure I'm actually a part of the steampunk community, even though a lot of people, I suppose, might look at me and think, yeah, he's a poser. That's about it, really. Simple, but to the point. So, yeah. Oh, I also do enjoy drinking quite a bit of cider. So
Yeah, well, I finally have some absinthe left for my birthday, so I will be enjoying that for this episode.
Okay.
But yeah. So let's just start a little bit about how you got into steampunk and started writing that. How did that go?
In terms of getting into steampunk, I can't honestly remember how I got into it initially. When I saw what steampunk was about, I think I first heard the term. As you probably guessed, the magazine was full of everything that was bizarre in it, and from there, it's difficult to explain. I think I saw steampunk not just as a genre, but as a tool for creating stories and unique worlds. I had seen a couple of images online. I've played many games that use steampunk as a sort of sub-medium. One of my favourites being Skies of Arcadia Legends. And I think I slowly just got into it from there. But in terms of writing, that actually came about one day when I was just driving a mate back home one day, and I'd always wanted to be creative. I wanted to create computer games, but I couldn't get into that sort of business very easily. Can't draw to save my life. And I basically said to my mate, look, I'm thinking of writing a book. Do you think I can do it? And whether he said it just nonchalantly or just to give me confidence, he said, yeah, mate, go for it. And from there, that was all I needed. From there, I just started writing. About a few months later, I started writing in 2015. About maybe 6 months later, I joined a writers group. And from there, I've improved. I think I've improved. Obviously, that's up to everyone else who's read the books to decide. My writing skill has improved over time. So,
All right.
yeah.
Do you like to read yourself?
Yes, but not all the time. I usually read just before I go to bed, and that helps me sleep. But aside from, I rarely read outside of that. At the moment, I'm reading a Terry Pratchett novel because his style of humour is really a great influence, and obviously it's best to learn from one of the all-time greats.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, is there any particular writer you particularly enjoy or that has really inspired your own style of writing?
I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I do enjoy the works of Chris Wooden, I think his name is. He wrote a book called The Black-Lunged Captain, and that's a part of a series, and I cannot remember what the heck the name of that series is. But for the most part, I think I was influenced to write, or at least start creating, by a lot of YouTube critics, such as Linkara, the Dom, Crimson Rogue, who review various things, and I think those guys taught me how not to write a story. Oh, yeah. And from there, I saw all, because most of the stuff they do is usually based off of, with the Dom and Crimson, it's adaptation reviews. With Linkara, it's bad comic books. Yeah. So I look at the points they bring up, what's bad, and I think to myself, wow, I'd really like to do something that's not that, and get better from there, and maybe one day write something that they in turn might look at themselves. So in terms of inspiration, I think it's from bad media in a way. So.
Oh yeah, no, I know exactly where you're coming from. I'm also a big fan of people like, I used to be a big fan of the Nostalgia Critic, not so much anymore, but I also love SF Debris.
Yes.
I love him and how he, his humor and also style of criticism, what he criticizes. I find all very appealing, and I want to do some video reviews myself pretty soon, because despite everything that's going on in my own personal life, I'm feeling creative for some reason, but maybe that's the point of it all. But yeah, let's just start in, because what have you written until now? Because you've already got something on Amazon and a Kelp, I think.
In total, I have 4 novels. All of them are on Kindle, 2 of which are in paperback also. I have one here. This is my second novel, Clockwork Hearts. And the 5th one is on its way. I'm just sort of getting someone to have a look at the manuscript to look for plot holes and everything like that before I go straight to sending it off to an editor. That's when it actually costs quite a bit of money. But yeah, at the moment that's how much I've written. 4 books, all on Kindle, and 2 of them in paperback at the present.
And you started in 2015.
Yep.
Wow. I started once on a something in 2009, and I written some. I've got a published short story, and that's about it. But yeah, so you've got this universe. I think it's called Orran Adventures.
Orran Adventures, but to be fair, I don't think pronunciation is that important, really. So yeah, Orran Adventures.
But can you explain a little bit about that world and what kind of stories these are? And yeah.
So it's set in a world completely different from our own. 4 continents on the sea and 5 floating in the sky high above. Metals such as bronze, brass, copper and tin, mithril, and one I made up called flexentite are the predominant metals. Elements such as plastics, aluminium, titanium and iron, with the exception of the trace amounts you find in blood, are non-existent. That was one of the main reasons why I wanted to make this steampunk world correct, because I think someone made an argument that if there's plastics in the world, then why are they still using these elements? So I stuck to that. It also has magic in it, including 4 schools of magic that do come up in many of the stories. And I think I've covered the basics of what the Orran Adventures series is, but in the way each book follows, it's a bit like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where you have a character introduced in the first book. In this case, my first book, The Buried Man, introduces the Deadlanders and the concept of necromancy, how that works, and it takes place in the country of Masevrica, which is based loosely off America. So a lot of countries are based off of real-world countries, and sometimes a mixture of the two. And then in the second book, it focuses more on sort of like the mechanical machinations and more sort of the technology, and introduces Charlie Blunt and the Rummel Detectives. That's in Clockwork Hearts. And so you introduce these characters, and then eventually I do an anthology story, which is loads of little stories. Then I might go back and do the sequel to the first book, eventually all building up to a big crossover where they all meet and to tackle a bigger threat.
Right. It's funny that every time I ask people who come on my show for where do you get your inspiration from, Joss Whedon and the Marvel Cinematic Universe keeps propping up. That gives me this theory that steampunk is basically a history combined with modern pop culture. What is your perspective on that?
I think the best way to say it is, I think there was a saying someone once said, good writers borrow, great writers steal. I tend to put a little bit of twist on that. Good writers borrow, great writers steal loads of little parts, and then create a monstrous Frankenstein of a story that is, as of course, inspired by all these little elements that they've stolen. How well they're actually noticeable and picked out it depends on, sometimes the quality of the story, it varies, but in terms of inspiration, just about everything inspires me in some way. I'm trying to think. I can't actually remember what inspired me to write The Buried Man. I think I wanted to write a novel about the undead that didn't involve mindless flesh-eating zombies, and actually, which it doesn't have. These undead, so to speak, would more likely invite you for a game of poker more than they would want to eat your brains and whatnot. So, in terms of inspiration, everywhere.
That's funny because last week I had somebody on the show who had also written a kind of series about an undead cop who's been an undead marshal that's been brought back to life through mechanics. So he also has the kind of that RoboCop in the past idea. So that's kind of funny that I now have you on. Jonathan Fesmeyer, I can call your name Jonathan there, who also is the, steampunk, and he also has something, a steampunk western, but with very similar elements to today's guest. So yeah, but let's we kind of talked about the influence from pop culture. Are there any elements from history that you use?
History, yes. In terms of building the history of the world of Orran itself, because it has a lore and a history that I'm working on as we speak. Things like the American War for Independence is heavily influenced in the history there. There are other. I'm trying to think, what else would there be? I mean, in terms of direct, historical events, not really off the top of my head. Most of the events that happen in this world are what's literally I'm creating as I go along. I do have wars planned. Characters and people will die, and when they do, I plan to keep it that way. There's no main, as much as I guess there might be a few main character shields here and there, only purely because not everyone has to die. Some people can have a happy ending. Sometimes you can have a mixture of the two. But yeah, in terms of elements from history, not that many. The only one I can think off the top of my head was the American War for Independence from the British, and that's sort of reference, and that does apply into the history of the world of Orran, but not yet. I haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah. Would you consider what you're writing more fantasy or more science fiction in that regard?
Honestly, I'd say fantasy. I think it depends what book you're reading. If it's The Buried Man, the first book, it's more fantasy because it involves a lot more magic. If it's Clockwork Hearts, it's more sci-fi because there's not as much magic in there. There is a little bit, but it does focus more on the technological machinations of madmen, as I described. The third book is also fantasy, and finally the fourth, because it's an anthology. Again, it depends on what story you're reading, and it goes back and forth between the two.
Right. So we're making more a quick round here tonight. So can you tell a little bit about the main characters and the characters' origins? Are there any characters in known fiction that people can compare them to?
I think if there's one I can think of, it would have to be, so start with Charlie Blunt, who is the main sort of protagonist in Clockwork Hearts. He was influenced by John Constantine, one of the influence, John Constantine, and I suppose MacGyver in a way, the way that there's this character called MacGyver and he creates something out of practically nothing, whatever he can find lying around, basically. I want to say Inspector Gadget, but Inspector Gadget's a bit of an idiot, so, well, I don't know, yeah, maybe, actually, yeah, same thing. So I apologise, I seem to have a bulldog tap dancing just outside. I hope that doesn't interfere too much with the sound here.
Okay. Is this better when I hold the microphone closer to my face? Does that help? Yeah, I'm still getting used to this new sound card, so the sound tends to get a little bit, yeah, not like I'm used to. Let's just keep it at that. And I also am working on some other project right now, and that requires me to speak into the microphone as well. However, that uses other recording equipment, so I'm constantly fiddling with the gain now. So yeah, but yeah, technical issues. It's part of the job, as they say. But yeah, where were we? We were talking about characters, I think. Is there any other character you like to showcase to the readers?
I suppose the other one would have to be Scullion from the first book, The Buried Man. He's basically a obsidian-clad... Obsidian works a little differently in the universe, in Orran. He's an obsidian-clad skeleton that can talk and enjoys a casual cigar, even though he doesn't have any lungs. There is actually a reason why he smokes a cigar, and sort of ties into what keeps him human and reminds him of his humanity. He is the one who inducts, so to speak, the Buried Man into the Deadlanders. And the Deadlanders are basically a group of reanimated human beings who have outlived the people who have created them, the necromancers, and then they go and hunt necromancers to stop them from bringing anyone else back from the dead. Because the idea is that being brought back from the dead is just awful. It's like being dragged to hell almost. It's just such a horrifying experience, and continuing to live with what you remember of the afterlife, as well as the fact that you have no sense of smell or taste, because, you know, as a reanimated human, what use would you have for either of those things? And yeah, so he inducts the Buried Man into the Deadlanders, and the concept of Scullion is that he's quite obviously morbid looking and would probably be quite a gruff and aggressive sort of character, but my intention is he's always respectful and caring about the people he brings. He brings into the Deadlands themselves, these reanimated humans who have, through one way or another, regained their free will, but are still dead.
Right. So yeah, well, you talk about, you know, undead and stuff like that. What would you say if you? What kind of story? Is there a lot of humor? Is it more horror focused?
There's humor in it. It has some elements of horror in it, but for the most part, I try and keep every story with a sort of with humor in it. The Buried Man will have humor in it. Clockwork Hearts, when I did a quick rewrite before it went to print, I tried to add a couple of bits of humorous moments. Nothing that will probably make you slap your knee and laugh really hard, but the only book that I struggled to add any humour in, I think, was the third one, because it was such a serious story about loss, moving on, and just trying to escape war, basically.
So yeah, you try to keep it a little bit balanced.
Yeah. I try to keep every novel light-hearted if I can. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Did we cover everything you wanted to talk about, or any other specific subjects you want to talk about? Or ask me, that's also okay. Yes, Angel Dragon, I do have Discords. We do have a Radio Retrofuture Discord group. If you want the link, I am more than willing to share it with you. And yes, if Discord will have a video chat function, I will immediately skip over to Discord and drop Skype entirely. Absolutely. And yes, we do also have a Discord chat. Absolutely. Yes, okay. Back to you, Timothy.
Any questions to ask you? I suppose what steampunk media, so like video games, books, or even TV shows, anything like that, is there anything steampunk themed that you're watching or reading, playing right now?
I'm trying to watch as much as possible to also find new avenues, new people to interview. So I'm kind of skimming a lot of content, especially on what people are sharing. But there are a number of things I want to get into. I'm thinking of doing a little piece on steampunk airships. I'm a big fan of Last Exile. I don't know if you heard about it. It's an anime, I think from 2004. It was one of the first anime that started to combine 3D animation with drawing. And it has aged really well. Especially because it's from a studio named Gonzo, and Gonzo has a bit of an iffy reputation when it comes to animation, but they did it really well. And they made Lost Exile, which has this Art Deco / dieselpunk steampunk universe, and it has these really awesome airship battles, unlike I've seen anywhere else, and I can really recommend this series. And as a kind of a thing to engage people, I posted this, well, what's your favorite airship? Because I have a lot of board games. I'm a big fan of board games, and I've become quite of a collector. My last purchase is Mansion of Madness, which is Cthulhu themed. But I also have games like Dystopian Wars and Leviathans, which both have these airships that are inspired by interbellum, early 20th century Navy vessels, which just looks amazing. And I was thinking, to post these regularly, like, oh yeah, my favorite class of airship, and then kind of see what response comes from that. However, Lost Exile is a universe, a really interesting universe, where there are several factions in the original series, and they have these huge airships. However, there is a third faction, and this third faction kind of controls the technology in that world. It is kind of like Dune. I am not sure you are familiar with that universe, where they have this Spacer Guild, and the Spacer Guild allows...
Frank Herbert's Dune? Yeah.
Yes, allows for space travel. Now, there's this organization in that universe called the Guild, and they have something similar. Like you'd have these huge airships. However, in each of these airships there's actually a little ship from the Guild, and that ship guild, or guild ship, allows that massive machine to fly. And if that ship gets heavily damaged or is burning or whatever, that guild ship just says, screw it, and leaves, with the result that the entire ship will crash with hands and all. Now, there are a number of other really weird things about that universe I find extremely interesting. The series is a very good example of show don't tell. And just for that, I really advise watching it, because it doesn't really explain anything or why things work the way they do, but when you start thinking about it, you can see, oh, I can see how this works. So I want to do some things about that, because I think it's really interesting. Like, for example, they have musketeers on these ships. So you gotta imagine, they've got these flying dreadnoughts with huge cannon batteries, but when these ships start to fight, these ramps go down, musketeers go stand on these ramps, and there is no cover on these ramps or anything, it's just the ramp and those musketeers. And the musketeers start shooting at each other. And the party that kills most musketeers wins.
And this is an anime?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Last Exiles, was it?
Last Exile. And yeah, it sounds really ridiculous. However, when you start to look at the context, it starts to make sense. Like I said, when one of these ships get damaged, the guild ship just leaves. So you already start to understand why they use musketeers instead of shooting at each other. However, this Urbanus, yes, I posted a photo of the Urbanus class in that universe, and one of the reasons why I like this airship is because it has chainsaws on the sides.
Brilliant.
Yes. However, then I started to have another look at the design. And like I said, all those ships in that universe are powered by guild ships. They need guild ships to fly. But not the Urbanus class. The Urbanus class was designed to fly on its own merit. But they didn't explain how they did it. But then I started looking at it. And then I noticed something. Because what these people can build without the guild's help are so-called van ships. They're basically fighters. Art Deco fighters without propellers. And they have these very particular tails, which is basically a pipe that goes around, and a fluid, I think it's called area, flows through it, and that helps those ships fly. Now I started looking at the Urbanus class, and guess what it still looks like?
I don't know, what is it?
A giant pipe. So basically what they did is build a huge van ship to solve their problem instead of relying on guild ships. And I thought, okay, I didn't notice it before, but that's like, okay, that is clever storytelling. Except you really needed to look at the ships to see why can these ships fly on themselves, and it was, oh, that's what they did. And I only noticed that recently. And I want to use that particular example as a way from how do you make an airship look unique? Because how many airships from any series do you recall? Like genuinely recall?
Oh, if like actual names of airships.
Yes.
I can remember quite a few from the Skies of Arcadia Legends game I mentioned a while ago, such as the the Albatross, the Delphine. I think it was the main ship, the Delphine, the Cygnus, the Hydra as well. That was more like a fortress though. And I can remember sort of like the design, certain aspects of the designs, even if I can't remember the names, because that game had a lot of colours in it. Like some ships were blue, red, bronze coloured, and even silver. But yeah, I can remember most of the airships from that game in particular.
Yeah.
But apart from that.
Yeah, well, the Japanese are just a lot better in designing memorable things like that. I started to notice because I've started to recall, started to think like, okay, what is an airship people know from more mainstream steampunk? And I don't know any. I know the ships from Leviathans, but that game is very obscure. It had a terrible launch. I will talk about it one day because it's the perfect example of how to not launch a board game and how not to make a game box. But it's a shame because it's a really good tactical strategy game. Dystopian wars, but it has similar designs to Leviathans because they're both inspired by early dreadnoughts. And yeah, that's about it. I guess the airship from Final Fantasy VII. I don't know what it's called again.
Highwind.
Highwind, yeah. So I guess I recall that ship. And that's about it, I think. So yeah, that's a subject I'm now thinking a lot about. And yeah, I work from subject to subject till I've got a video done. And yeah, then I move on to the next subject, basically.
Well, here's one. What's your favourite tipple by any chance? I mean, you mentioned you got some absinthe with you, but is that your absolute favourite, or?
Absinthe. Well, I do enjoy my absinthe, I must say. We've got in the Netherlands, we've got a very good distillery. I also enjoy a Tanqueray gin with tonic. Love that. Yeah, and those are my guilty pleasures at this moment, I suppose. Yeah, we also when I'm at festivals, we also have a lot of mead. We also have a very good, but a bit more expensive meadery in the Netherlands now. Very good mead, but yeah, it's also at the price. But for
I loved mead at one point, but unfortunately, it's one of those cases where I either had the wrong kind, probably definitely, and then had a bad night on it, basically. So it's one of those cases where when you say, do you like this alcohol? And they say, oh, I had a bad night on it, and now I can't drink it anymore. So.
Yeah. Well, last time I had a very interesting mead. It was mead with absinthe. And it was like, okay, I hadn't had that before, but there was a just German guy who basically put absinthe in the mead, and it was pretty good. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. And yeah, is there anything else, or shall we go to the final statement?
Yeah, unfortunately, my brain doesn't always come up with the best subjects, unfortunately. Aside from booze, of course. All
right. So can your brain manage to bring up a little conversation, some words of inspiration for the listeners back home?
Okay, if you're working on something, try your best to finish it, because when it does get finished, it's at least something that you could look back on and say, okay, yeah, that was finished. One of the biggest mistakes I think I ever did, though, having said that, was when I wrote my first book. I released it in 2015, and it wasn't edited, it wasn't proofread. I was so desperate to get it out because I was so worried at the same time that I would get bored of this hobby and just quit. And that would be another hobby on the table of life, and then just moving on. Unfortunately, as a result, the very first draft of The Buried Man on Kindle was garbage, unreadable, full of mistakes and everything. So obviously, I guess it's a bit of a mixture there. Obviously, take your time with what you need to work on if you're working on something, but keep at it as well. So. All
right. I think those are good words to live by.
Kind of made them up on the fly, but yeah.
No, that's okay. That's what a lot of the people do, and sometimes the best ideas stem from that. And yeah, I cannot agree more. Just when you have an idea, go for it. Don't do it tomorrow. It's easy to do things tomorrow, but sometimes there is no time like the present. So yeah, that's my addition to that little caveat. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Of course, I'll put the links to the Amazon and the Kindle to Timothy's work down in the description once I post the edited version, which I hope to have done Friday, although we do have a busy day Friday, so yeah, I'll have to check it out, but I don't expect to have that much editing to do this time. So yes, Timothy, thank you for being here.
Cheers, Bonsart.
Yes, good luck on your next book. Do you know when can we expect your next work?
The problem is I never set a deadline purely because otherwise you get what happened with the very first Buried Man novel, where I just rushed it out. It will be out by the end of the year, definitely. Set for 2017. It'll be. I'm hoping to definitely have it done by then.
Alright, well, with that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this episode, like I said, and of course, as always, keep making things your way.
5, 6, 7, 8, hit it!